lead us with the karakia, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Our karakia is up there. It's also on your orange cards, number 2. We must be getting to a point in time where we can just about throw the cards away. It'll be all up here. So working with me. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta. Kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hou, ti he mauriora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. E a kuranga tira tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you. All right, are there any notices? No notices? Any apologies? I have an apology from the Chair, Rex Graham. Roger Marker. Not here. Somebody have an apology for Roger?
No.
I'll move that the apologies be received. A second. Anyway, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. Conflict of interest declarations. Time to fess up. Anybody's got any more conflicts than they've already indicated?
Chair, I'd just like to advise that the Group Manager Asset Management, Mr Dolly, does have a conflict of interest in relation to the item public excluded. It's public excluded this afternoon. We're likely to get to it on Waipatiki Bush Reserve.
Okay.
I probably also have some knowledge, but we'll talk about that in PE.
Okay. We'll do that.
Roger.
Roger, only move forward.
Yeah.
Go to Roger. All right. Minutes of the Environment Integrated Catchments meeting held on 5th of February 2020. A long time ago. It's been circulated. Would someone like to move the minutes as circulated be endorsed?
Happy to.
Jeff, anyway. Are there any errors or amendments people would like to have with the minutes? Being none, I'll move that they be sustained. Confirmed. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. Follow-ups from the previous Environment and Integrated Catchments Committee meetings. We just get my Stella, by any other name. Would you like to lead us through this, Chief Executive?
Yes, Chair. So the first item is just underway, and I understand a briefing will be provided to the Ahuriri Working Group at their next meeting at the end of July, and will subsequently come to this committee as well. September meeting, I imagine, is that's likely. And no doubt we'll have a discussion on climate change under item number 6. But it has been established and it's met. And then in relation to the Council's carbon reduction program, that has already been reported in the organisational performance report, and work is underway with a provider to expand the coverage of that reporting across all of Council's activities.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
Mr Chair, just on the climate change item, we have had a report from Gavin Ide to those who participated in the meeting referred to, dealing with the issue of the stock take of other local authority actions and the comparative assessment of where we're at in that regard, procurement of a consultant for a regional greenhouse gas footprint assessment, and a community perception survey which is about to be relaunched. So that is continuing to progress through the matters discussed at the meeting referred to.
Sure. All right. Any other items people like to raise? Okay, would someone care to move that the follow-ups be, we don't need a motion for that, do we? Sorry? Right, call for minor matters not on the agenda. Martin?
Regenerative farming practices and water security.
Regenerative farming practices, water security. Any other items?
Chair, regenerative farming seminar.
Regenerative farming seminar. Farming seminar. Any others? All right. We now move on to item 6. Notice motion about climate change. Can I just set out a couple of thoughts before we get into the substance of this? I do note that, observe that that for process here that you need to have a motion and a seconder. Moving a seconder, or else there's no debate. So I'm going to move a motion shortly and seek a seconder, but I'm not going to then proceed directly into the debate. I think we should have stopped at that point and have some questions, because there's a lot of commentary about this from the staff. I'd like to have the opportunity to explain and go through that. And once we've got through that, we'll then look at, I'll then look at where we proceed from here, because we might need to make some amendments to the original motion. And I do note that in the options, there's option 2.1 and 2.2, and it's really interesting that 2.2 is a direct negative of the motion to do so, and as a chair you would normally rule that out, because if you're against it you just vote it down. The second option I note is that the original motion moved by me is not an option on the two here, which is kind of, I have to say, staff, screwing the scrum a bit. I would have thought that they should have had the resolution as one that I put forward, option 2.1 as a second option, and 2.3 as a third option. So, but I can overcome that difficulty, and I'm going to do so by simply moving the resolution as I submitted it directly. So that will be a recommendation from recommendation 1.1 all the way through to whatever it is, notes 1.4. So I'll move those items.
I'll second.
Seconded, Martin? Okay, thank you. Right, now I just open up for opportunity for the Chief Executive. Staff have written quite a bit of commentary about this, so I think it would be good for you to go work through these and put out what the issues are, and we might have some questions. I certainly have. Others might have some questions, and once we've got through the debris of that, we'll see where we go from here. Okay, James.
Thank you, Chair. So last year, when the Council resolved to declare a climate change emergency, there was a proposal from staff put forward for that declaration to be a regional one made in conjunction with the territorial authorities, and that a governance body of some sort be established involving the 5 councils of the region, as well as tangata whenua and broader community participation, and that collective governance would develop a work program in relation to the regional climate change response. In the event we were unable to get all 5 councils on board in time for the declaration, and HBRC went ahead and resolved to declare. Subsequently, there has been some discussion with the territorial authorities about collaboration in the space, but it has not advanced particularly to any developed point at this stage, owing to the COVID-19 situation and the distraction really that the 5 councils have had over the last 4 or 5 months or so on other matters. So the concept of a regional collaboration here between the councils which is proposed with the 4 mayors and with Ngāti Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated is not inconsistent with that original thinking. But I guess what we've observed about the notice of motion is it's very specific and very prescriptive. So it involves a governance structure with the other councils, the chair of Ngāti Kahungunu. It's specific about staffing, and it's reasonably specific about the activities that would be undertaken. Nothing inherently concerning about any of that, other than the fact that rather than the notice of motion suggesting that this is a concept to be explored with those parties, and that the concept in terms of the work that would be undertaken by this entity be explored. As it's drafted, the notice of motion just recommends that this take place. So from a staffing point of view, it's got to a level of prescription ahead of, I guess, exploration of the issues, including looking at the problem to be solved, if you like, and what is the most effective use of both council's resources and those resources of the other councils involved in responding to climate change. We'd also, I guess, note that we're in a process already with the working group of council on climate change to develop a climate change work program. That's to inform the long-term plan, to enable us to consult the community on what an appropriate mix of interventions by council should be, including informing that mix of interventions by the community survey, comprehensive community survey, which has been procured, that is asking questions around preparedness to fund various interventions within the community, what people within the community already do in relation to climate change mitigation, to give us an evidence base on which to design our interventions. So our recommendation to you is that we continue with that work so that we have an evidential base on which to design a package of interventions for the long-term plan. We consult the wider community, including our treaty partners and including the other councils of the region. And once we've done that, bring back to council some developed proposals that can be considered within the long-term plan alongside all other priorities. So it is observed here that the notice of motion proposes funding this over the next 2 years from the disaster reserve. I think it's clear in the paper staff view of what the purpose of that reserve fund is typically there for. And one of the challenges, I guess, that we would face with establishing something using the disaster reserve fund is that we would be in effect committing to long-term plan ongoing expenditure after that ahead of the long-term plan process. So really it's a question of timing, and really it's a question of the extent of analysis and due diligence that's gone into this proposal, which may be entirely worthwhile, including consultation with central government entities like the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority that presently runs a program with businesses, and then perhaps others in the region such as the 3R group, who the council has collaborated with in the last 12 months around business climate change response and is playing a leadership role under the Greenhouse Gas Climate Change Coalition in the private sector. So look, there's activity going on, as I say, in the private sector, activity going on at the national level, and we would want to understand all of that and how this fits in before recommending that a proposition such as this proceed.
Just a couple of quick questions for me before I open up to others with questions. So if we were to put this proposal into the long-term plan and go through all of those things, when would you think we would be in a position to have someone start on the job as a function of going through the long-term plan?
Essentially the 1st of July next year would be the time that the funding would be available for that, and once the LTP is confirmed we would move to recruit and appoint staff and get the program underway.
So when's the long-term plan completed by?
So we'd expect decisions in June next year, final decisions, final consultation.
Final consultation in June next year. Right, so basically we'll be
12 months away.
12, 18 months away. Okay. Right, anybody got any questions? Martin?
Yeah, James, thank you for that. That was really helpful. Can you just remind me of the triennial agreement priorities? Is climate change in there? And two, in terms of the recommended consultation with the other entities that would be involved in this, is that something that the Joint Leaders Forum could have on their agenda over the next 2 to 3 months to progress that conversation with the other parties?
Look, absolutely. So climate change is a priority in the triennial agreement, and as I said in my opening remarks, there was a discussion underway within the Leaders Forum about joint action on climate change. That was occurring prior to the COVID situation, but it hasn't been on the agenda for discussion within the Leaders Forum or between the regional CEOs group in the last 4 or 5 months for obvious reasons, really. So yes, we can certainly bring that back and advance those discussions. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that all the councils in the region recognise that they need to collaborate on climate change. There's a desire to increase our activity here and build a work program. I guess that as we've noted in the paper, we'd want to think carefully about creating an operational structure that's funded solely by the regional council under the governance of others. And I think ideally, if it's going to be collectively governed, we'd like to see it collectively resourced, and those other councils and Ngāti Kahungunu make a funding contribution to the activity. Otherwise, effectively, we're outsourcing governance of our own operational expenditure to others who are not accountable necessarily to this council.
Why?
Thank you, James. So when the emergency was declared last term, did you have a clear plan, or was there a clear plan about how to resource, put energy towards focusing on dealing with the climate emergency? And what was that plan leading up to the possible long-term plan solutions to that?
So there was not a plan at the point that the declaration was made. So the declaration was a notice of motion initiative that came from a councillor. It wasn't something that came out of our existing long-term plan work program. Mm-hmm. When the notice of motion, when that declaration was made, there was a direction to staff to bring back a community engagement program, mm-hmm. and also a work program around both the council's own climate change footprint as well as the regional issues for climate change, and that's what staff have been working on. There have been several subsequent presentations to council on that work, and it is ongoing. It has been disrupted slightly by the COVID-19 situation, but the work continues, and that's the work which Councillor Williams referred to earlier on.
And I see in the paper it's quite haphazard, and I could agree with that, being on the working group. And there seems to be a need for focused energy.
Yep, agreed.
And we've got this gap until long-term plan and then the implementation of whatever this work needs to look like. But in the meantime, it seems that there's a gap there that needs to be filled.
Well, look, I think there's a number of issues here. First of which is that the council, as has been discussed with council regularly, has a comprehensive program of work related to climate change adaptation. It's our water security work, it's our coastal hazards work, it's our flood upgrade work, etc. And what we presently have underway with our comms team is work to package up and communicate the work the council already does. And as I said before, we've got a survey underway to understand community perceptions and understanding the climate change issues, so we can then tailor our community engagement program to what we understand the community's needs to be. With respect to climate mitigation, and I understand the primary focus of the notice of motion here is in relation to climate mitigation, that's not something which council has this council, or really any council in New Zealand, has seen as its responsibility. Traditionally, that has been managed at the national level, and that's done through the emissions trading scheme and a whole range of policy interventions by central government. The RMA has just been amended to enable councils, including ourselves, to take into account greenhouse gas emissions as part of our consenting activity, and national guidance is going to be provided on how that's given effect to in the coming months.
Just one last thing. Have we assumed to take leadership on this as a region?
As a council?
Yeah.
So certainly in relation to climate change adaptation, I think in relation to climate change mitigation, there is a conversation to be had about what are our levers, and I think there is a genuine risk that this council states an ambition that it can't deliver upon in terms of the levers around mitigation.
Okay, leadership coordination, we assume that.
So definitely coordination around regional activity. I think for us to be, for example, taking position on reducing emissions from the regional transport network is ambitious. Our largest greenhouse gas emissions for the region come from ruminant agriculture, so the Regional Council taking a position around reducing ruminant emissions in the region would be well beyond our capabilities as an organisation. So, there are some complexities around that. We know that the lowest cost mitigation opportunity for Hawke's Bay around climate change emissions is tree planting. And again, on the agenda today is our Right Tree, Right Place proposition. So the Regional Council is providing leadership in terms of afforestation. So there are some elements that we can and do already provide leadership on. I think it's more a question of packaging up that which we do and communicating that, less so than I think it is us developing a whole new suite of interventions. But there are possibly some gaps and we just need to understand those carefully. I think there is a risk that with this initiative, if we were to launch into this, we could find ourselves in a space where 3 FTEs would cost us plus overheads in the order of $500,000 a year. So with some operating budgets plus salaries, we could spend that, say, for 3 years, spend $1.5 million of ratepayer money, and we might be able to demonstrate little or no impact on regional emissions. If we haven't clearly thought through the intervention logic, we've clearly understood what our levers for influence are, and it might be a nice thing to do, but it might not be an effective thing to do. And I can't sit here today and tell you whether it will be effective or not, because the homework hasn't been done.
Can I just ask a couple of questions for that? Just in regards to funding regionally for things, what's been our experience of this, and projecting that, what do you think would be our experience in the future? And I reflect on 2 things. One is funding for civil defence, and how this council took it over, and other councils said they would reduce their budgets to cover that. We know the experience of that, and also climate adaptation issues, which we've got. It's been my observation this has been very, very challenging, and in the climate mitigation space would be just as, if not. So I'm rather jaundiced in the view that we would be successful. You might have a much more optimistic view of that. So if you have, you tell us what it is and why you have your optimism that we would be able to get this agreed.
Do you mean in terms of getting funding contributions from others?
Yeah. For example, let's go back to it. The reason the Regional Council took over civil defence was because the funding for it was patchy, and it was a regional issue, and we were going to be responsible for it regionally. So we took it over. In taking it over, we said we would only pick up the rates if councils gave a discount for the rates. Neil Curtin will remember this debate. We didn't get the discount. And experience was we solved the problem simply because we took ownership of it. In climate mitigation, similar. We've struck in a couple of holes at the moment because we can't get agreement to fund the obvious. It seems to me that if we're going to deal with climate mitigation, we'd be in exactly the same problem, if not more so. But if you can convince me that we've got a better prospect on this, well, then I'm happy to hear it. I just don't think it's there.
Look, I think getting substantial funding from the TAs for this purpose could be challenging. We are seeing some challenges in the coastal hazards space at the moment. And I think what that underscores is that, one, we've already got some real challenges, and the funding of the coastal hazards, which will come through the long-term plan, it is going to be a significant burden on ratepayers, particularly in terms of ongoing operating costs, which are looking in the order of $3 to $6 million a year. And so I guess on that I'd be again cautioning adding further out-year commitments through an initiative at this stage until we understand the totality of our long-term plan budget commitments in the space. And we may well conclude that our sweet spot and our most important place to be funding is in climate change adaptation, not mitigation. And spreading ourselves too thin trying to do too much in relation to climate change and not adequately resourcing and delivering on the most important priorities for the region in climate change.
You moved off the topic there with respect to change. So let's come back to the point that you're straight on to climate change, adaptation, mitigation. You do concede that we spend quite a lot of money and resource on adaptation and that we spend little really on mitigation as an effective thing. Do you think that climate mitigation is less important in this than adaptation?
Not at all. I think it's evident, though, that the climate change mitigation tools typically rest at the national level. They do relate to energy policy in particular and transport policy, and central government has recently enacted significant legislation. The Climate Change Commission's underway setting the climate budgets for the nation. I just don't see that the Regional Council has the capability, capacity, and I'm not sure that 3 new FTEs would change our ability to have leverage and influence in the space. I think that's something that needs some significant thought.
I'm happy to debate. Will, do you have a question?
Oh, thanks, Chair. Just further to what James was saying there, James, how, with regards to the adaptation, and you spoke as some of our core role there, how well do you think we are resourced now to achieve what we need to achieve just in that space?
So the big funding decisions lie ahead. I've mentioned coastal. It's true around the flood schemes. It's true around water security, and it's going to be true for the long-term plan around afforestation. Cumulatively, those 4 areas, which are the biggest and most important interventions, in my view, around regional climate change impacts on Hawke's Bay, and as I said before, afforestation is our best bet in terms of climate change mitigation. Particularly for the Regional Council with the co-benefits for water quality, biodiversity, etc. Cumulatively, those 4 areas will be in the tens of millions of dollars for council funding going forward. So, yeah, we've got some really big stuff to confront in the long-term plan, which will have significant rate increases associated with them if council is going to progress those things alone, let alone adding new initiatives.
Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, James. The challenge for the coastal hazards is more on the implementation of the recommendations of the Joint Committee. Can you just tell me and remind me, please, how that Joint Committee itself is funded, which would be the equivalent here, not what happens, but has there been any challenge in getting joint funding for the committee itself?
No, so it's been a 3-way funding exercise between Napier, Hastings and ourselves, and we share the costs evenly. Having adequate funding for the work program has been a challenge at times.
Yeah, just before you get to that.
Yep.
So what are we talking? What does that cost? What does the Joint Committee on?
In the order of $150,000 per council per year. I think that's
That's
right.
currently 100
100
per council, and we have discussed going up to 150 because we find 100 is a bit of a stretch to get through the work program every year.
So if you were talking $500,000, which for 3 FTEs would be $135,000 each, but there's other bits to the package. I understand you'd be looking at about that order of $100,000 per local authority, provided you got agreement to commit to this initiative as put in the motion.
certainly, although I would expect that Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa would make a much smaller contribution.
So $100,000 for this council. Let's say it's $200,000. What would the rate increase be to cover $200,000? Is there
In the order of 1%.
1% for $200,000?
General rate funded.
Yeah. Thank you.
Craig?
So we're not debating the merits of the motion yet, we're question and answer. So can you just go back, James, to the initiatives in and around climate mitigation, change management, whatever it might be, with the other TAs? And just if you could explore that a bit further as to why it seems to be very little has actually happened. There's lots of words. I go into the various council websites and the mayor's statements, and they're all very high level and progressive in things climate change, but then I keep looking for action and things that are actually happening. So could you just explore that as to why why the initiative, which was passed about a year ago or so now, and I think the other councils all by and large passed something similar, yet here we are a year later, and yes, climate have gone up in priority within this council. It's reflected in the annual plan or to climate.smart, etc. But in this building, but across the region, it's just so hard to see actual action, commitment, something happening. But I do caveat, to be fair, this is a long term, it's been coming for a long time and it's going to long term fix, but now, it's a year. So, and with all due respect, I don't really accept the COVID put a delay on things, because if it's desktop, COVID actually could have increased some of that work. So could you just explore that a bit further? Because to me it's quite crucial to how if the motion was to be passed, the key is this leadership, coordination and group. And yet, like so many things across the bay, it ain't worked.
So just to be clear on the COVID side of things, so almost our entire planning team was deployed to the Group Emergency Coordination Centre for most of the response. Gavin Ide, who's been the lead principal advisor on climate change, was the intelligence manager for the COVID response, so our team was offline. In terms of the regional dialogue amongst the CEs and the mayors, we were in discussion on climate change at the start of this year, but it hasn't been a focus, as we've been entirely consumed by the COVID response.
Yeah, and sorry, don't take that wrong. I meant the other councils. There's been lots of bodies who weren't involved in the emergency response.
Yeah.
Not talking.
So look, I think in terms of adaptation, the work continues, obviously in the coastal space, and it continues with water security, and we've had quite a lot of work with those councils around that. I think what people keep coming back to is where is the mitigation and where is the behaviour change? Yep. Well, so Councillor Belford, previous councillor last term, initiated some work around this and got a group of folk together from across the region to look at climate change mitigation. And what becomes evident is that Hawke's Bay's electricity generation is almost entirely renewable. It comes almost entirely from hydro. Our emissions profile as a region arises from two things. One is agriculture, the second is transport. In relation to transport, we obviously provide a public transport system. We've got a whole bunch of work around the efficiency of our transport network. He and his group looked at whether the regional council should get into the business of subsidising electric vehicles and whether we could do more. We ended up with an initiative which was to promote EVs. Ourselves as a council, there was a website set up to promote EVs in Hawke's Bay and work done with Unison around that. So when you look at transport, there are limits beyond what we currently do. We can, and this is a conversation which we've had with council recently, further subsidise the bus fleet. Could we buy electric buses? Could we do those sorts of things? So transport, there's a limited set of levers. We're doing things in that space already. But the bigger levers involve some really big money. Even central government appears to have backed off the subsidies for electric vehicles. Then I go to agriculture. Agriculture, the other big area of emissions. Really complex problem. Government's thrown tens and tens of millions of dollars at research around that. HBRC has no comparative advantage or levers to pull in that area other than land use change, and obviously we are promoting afforestation of marginal land through our other programs. So I go back to it, if somebody can tell me what are the levers available to us and what are the things that Hawke's Bay can do to reduce its emission profile, the regional council can influence, then really happy to build that into our work program, but it's not evident what they are.
Can I answer that?
Sure, Martin, be my guest, I'll join the queue.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the transport, and we are doing a lot of work aligned to the new government policy statement, which is one of 4 cornerstones. In fact, 2 of 4 cornerstones are mode shift and climate change. So if we're going to want funding for the transport infrastructure in this region, it's going to be climate smart. So that will be happening, and that is happening. But the other opportunity that I think is coming, not through the Amendment Act that we've just seen, but through the broader review, and you may have seen a paper I circulated about this, is for farm environment plans that with co-benefits for water management, the research is tending to indicate that you can have greater economic productivity, reduced nutrient emissions and reduced greenhouse emissions all at one time. So a lever that this council will have in the lifetime of the next 3-year long-term plan, I'm convinced of it, will be to audit farm environment plans through a climate change lens. And that could result in reductions of up to 10 to 15% in our emissions as a region just there. So that's transport, and that's farm environment plans. The next one, though, that I think we have got the best opportunity to show global leadership, let alone national, is actually planning for a zero carbon region through the next regional policy statement, whereby every single chapter optimises the options for delivery of our resource management solutions on the option that has the best output in terms of reduced carbon emissions. So that is something that is coming, and so I've got in the back of my mind how we're gearing up in our long-term plan and our planning strategy for the next regional plan review, and with this group channeling into those areas. So I think those are some significant areas. Urban design is one, street design, dealing with the transport situation, how our houses are built, the way they're oriented, building in solar, and obviously the insulation packages we've all got, all of that right through to where our infrastructure is, where people live, keeping people off the soils, everything, how we plan for this region. We need to create a world in which it is possible to live a productive and happy life in a zero carbon scenario. So that is a major lever we've got as a council, and I'm determined that we apply it.
Just before I go to Neil, I just want to answer the question a little bit to your question. It seems to be that what we've got at the moment is a top-down driven process, globally, nationally, and so on. The big gap for me is in individual consumer decisions, what individuals do. And we've done little or nothing to influence consumer behaviour. And we've done little to change behaviour of sectors in our region and so on. And the purpose of this is to say to people, well, what are you doing? What are you doing about this? I give you, for example, I would like to see someone go to Watties and say, well, Mr. Wattie, what are you doing about carbon emissions? What are you doing about energy efficiency? What are you doing with that? Do you have a plan to reduce to zero? And I might say, well, we've got this. But just to ask them, to challenge them, to say, what are you doing? I think will bring about behaviour change. My governing principle here is a weak one, I know you would suggest, James, but my view is if you tell Kiwis to do something, they won't. You ask them, and they will. So what I thought the purpose of this is to have some feet on the ground, something to go and ask people, what are you doing? Will you change your behaviour? I think, for example, the orchardists, some very smart people. I'd like someone to turn up and meet with them and say, well, what are you guys doing here? I'll sort of scratch their head and they say, have you realised there's a problem? I'm sure they'll say, yes, it is. Well, what are you doing to get yourself to carbon neutrality? Well, I'll probably say not a lot, but what could you do? And they'll get their heads together. I'm sure they'll figure out a plan. They'll work it out because we asked them. At the moment, everybody's sitting there waiting. That's the gap. All these other levers are way off here. And I think we have a dynamic approach like that. We will change behaviour in this region and lead to a whole lot of other people. Because when individuals change their behaviour, they'll change how they spend, how they interact with other people, and bring about quite a significant change. At the moment, it's all driven from the top. No one's asking people on the bottom to change their behaviour. I think that's the huge gap here. And there's no resources. Words on paper, words on plans, do not do it. It's someone asking. Neil.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the nature of the discussion, which is valuable in terms of that. But coming back to the Q&A that we wanted to raise, and just before I go to my question to James, I do want to follow up, if you give me a moment, on your comment about changing that behaviour. I totally accept and agree that that's a good proposition and an intervention we should be exploring. And I just preface it with a little story. I came to work yesterday when it was pouring with rain, and I see a policeman standing at the bus stop every morning. I'm driving to work. 5 of my colleagues, the senior executive team, live in Pariati, and yet we drive our own vehicles to work. And another example, on my way to work, I see a minimum of 5 regional council vehicles also heading to work. So there in itself is an opportunity for behaviour change, and I need to do it myself. So that, getting back to where we started, the question, and my question, and I think, James, you may not have expanded this well enough, that is, we've had in place our own carbon reduction approach for some time pre-declaration, and I just wondered, I think we undersell ourselves in terms of the actions that we have taken. Can you just expand a little on the carbon reduction strategies you've got in place internally, so we're clear on what the bigger picture looks like?
So the internal one just quickly relates to waste reduction. We've minimised our waste as an organisation considerably in recent years. Our energy usage of our buildings and our energy efficiency, we've increased the performance of those markedly. We have a fleet optimisation program in terms of utilisation of our vehicles, and also an EV first policy, and have been progressively introducing electric vehicles. To be honest, I suspect all of those reductions will be dwarfed by the emissions from the livestock that we have grazing our river bins, for example. So that presents a much more significant issue, and we have work which we presented to council previously, which will come through the long-term plan around getting livestock off our river berms and mowing those instead. We have to look at the diesel that we'll use relative to all of that. And I just make that point because there are practical limitations to this council eliminating all of its greenhouse gas emissions, but we also offset that enormously by the forest that we have. So look, we have got a program. What we wanted to do was have all of that independently verified and reported. So there is a piece of work being finalised at the moment with an independent auditor that will comprehensively look at the regional council's overall footprint, and then report that independently as opposed to staff reporting, which is the current practice at the moment. If I could just go back to Councillor Williams's comments, we totally agree that the regional policy statement and the regional resource management plan are key levers, and I think Councillor Williams has probably had some discussions with the planning team already about our proposed reform of the regional policy statement. That is a huge opportunity for us over the next couple of years. And then on farm environment plans, we're involved at the national level in the integration of greenhouse gas footprinting into farm environment plans. That work is happening at the national level under a project called Hawke which is a collaboration across the primary sector with government about on-farm greenhouse gas footprinting and how that will be embedded into farm environment plans. So that's absolutely a lever available to us in the future. At the moment, we're just trying to stand up water quality farm environment plans, and then that work at the national level will provide guidance about how the two come together. But certainly I see in the future this regional council playing a key role in those farm environment plans for greenhouse gas emissions as much as for water quality. So again, these are all examples of things that we already have in play. I think the thing we lack at the moment is clear communication around the full package of the council's activities. And I guess in the behavioural change space, that is a very complex and difficult space to operate in that requires some significant expertise and science. Our public perception survey is the first step in understanding the community that we're working with. But with the major businesses in the region like Heinz Watties, there is a national program administered by the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority to go into businesses for free, I believe, and provide them with grants around reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. Many businesses in Hawke's Bay have had grants for things like boiler replacement, etc. So those programs already exist and working with businesses. And part of what we would have liked to have done and would do if this was put through the LTP process is understand that totality of effort occurring at the national level by national agencies as well as the private sector, and bring that all for council to consider how you might want to play in this space as opposed to prejudging that ahead of that analysis.
Well done, James.
Good. Well, any other questions?
Can I just a point, if
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
allowed, Chair? I guess James will take up the conversation about ruminant animals at a later date. But could I just make the point, if we think mowing grass with a diesel-powered tractor is going to save us rather than ruminants grazing that grass that were here long before humans, then I think we're all doomed anyway.
And a spray with Roundup.
Well, I think what I'll do is I think it might be just worthwhile going around and asking each council a bit of a view on what they have of this. So I'll just get a sense of the feel of the meeting, and then we can then work out how we approach it. Chair, if you...
Yeah, okay. And my question is, if I look at our strategic plan, and when we were at East Pier prior to the new year, we made a resolution that everything we do, we would look through the lens of climate change. And if you look at our strategic plan, and sure, they're words on paper, but they actually mean a lot to us and to our staff, where it actually says that climate change is at the heart of everything we do. And truly, you look at every paper that we see in front of us, there's always a mention of climate change. And if and it's almost even more powerful than engagement with tangata whenua. So that's how important we see this. So, and I agree with you, ask a Kiwi what his view is, and they'll think about it, and yes, I'm actually not doing it, I should be doing it. And I'll give you one example, but I think it's even beyond this asking. When I came to New Zealand, I often give this example. When I came to New Zealand as a young man, you walk into a supermarket and smack, a kid gets a hiding from his mum because he asked for a lolly or whatever it was, I wasn't listening to the conversation. We started to have this conversation about anti-smacking. And sure enough, even before it went to Parliament, it actually stopped completely. Didn't happen anymore. We didn't need legislation. We just were actually practice making. We were talking about it. And we said, actually, this is a bad practice. We should stop this. And we had these discussions. And I think we as a council are having this discussion with our community. And we're talking about this all the time. And if I ask James the question, right tree, right place, is that climate mitigation? I think it is, totally. Increasing our park footprint, is that climate mitigation? Yes, it is. Healthy homes. I'm just about to sign up an agreement with this council to actually have a photovoltaic system on my house. And not because I really need it, but I think it's the right thing, because I will end up with an electric vehicle at some stage that's got 4 wheels. Yesterday I took possession of an electric vehicle with 2 wheels. It's actually my second vehicle with 2 wheels, because I believe that actually moving about on electric vehicles is the way to go. And if we can do it actually on bikes rather than cars, Neil, we're far better off. There are places in Europe that are streets that have 33,000 bikes, not annually, per day. Imagine 33 bikes, people going to work That's amazing, you know. And if we can make those changes, and I was gonna have a mention of that in minor items, but I've unfortunately got to go to a funeral of a dear friend. Otherwise, I would have talked about it a bit more. But this is where we can make changes, and I believe with what we're already doing and talking about it is actually going to make a change, because it's like the anti-smacking bill, it'll have unintended consequences and they'll be positive. If we talk about climate change and everything, even if you look at our focus, all those 4 points have all got climate change in them. And I believe that will actually permeate into mitigation at the same time, because you can't do one without the other. And therefore people, just the normal people, the simple households, they will make changes. And we're talking about it all the time. And so I feel we're absolutely on the right track. And people who are listening to this will be actually, who are already making huge investment in this particular area, will be somehow ticked off that they need to be asked to do more and be told to do more, because they're already doing a lot. I'll leave it at that. That's my view on it.
Yeah, I'd like to support Rick's motion from 1.1 to 1.4, because I believe there's a gap in our climate mitigation work in terms of regional coordination, and that's been identified, and I'd like to see this kicked off sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think I'm probably in support of the motion myself, and I just to talk about COVID. I think if anything, COVID showed us that we can change our behaviour. No vehicles on the road was really noticeable around the whole country. Waterways around the world were getting better. Smog disappeared. So I think we as a regional council do have the levers, like brought up by Councillor Martin, and you supported it yourself, Mum James. I think if we had to change our name to Environment Hawke's Bay instead of Regional Council, we would have been halfway there already, because we actually are doing the things that will lead towards change. We are leading the way in behaviour change, and so I really would probably support the bill. It is a question of cost. I certainly agree with that it's it'd be hard to put it back on our ratepayers again, and they're going to have to do it as well with their own council as well as with the regional rate. So, yep. But I think we can probably work through that, because there are a lot of things we're doing already. We just haven't pinned a tail on it and called it a donkey.
Charlie? Will?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's been really healthy discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I can't support the motion though, for a number of reasons. So I'll start with the financials and resources. So for the last few months now, we've been talking about how bad things look post-COVID, and struggling to balance the books. We've lost income. We're not proposing to charge rates to help out ratepayers, and likely to borrow money, but going to have to make that up in years to come with more increases. So my farm rates 2018 to 2020 have increased 73%. That's not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model. And if we keep adding more services to what we're already doing, how can we not but just keep increasing rates? So I guess I urge you to think of our ratepayers. They're not a bottomless pit. What would the CHB people say in answer to the question of what have we achieved during that time of increase? If they thought about the key role of regional council in climate change, they'd say water security and flood protection. What's regional council done for them in even the last 10 years around those two issues? So I can't support another increased level of service. We have added things like trees on farms, future farming trusts recently. These are all, as Councillor Van Beek says, they're all got climate change through them. We have to stop hooey and start doing. So on to climate change. Let's look at some of the headlines, Chair, that you've shared with us in your correspondence. South Pole warming at 3 times the rate. Siberia heatwave. Sea level rise more than a metre by 2100. all alarming stuff. I'll give you one headline in return from the Financial Times. China expands coal plant capacity to boost forest economy. Subheading, China has given the green light to add more coal plant capacity in 2020 than the past 2 years combined. China's contribution to the Paris Agreement to achieve the peaking of carbon dioxide emissions around 2030 and making best efforts to peak earlier than that. So that means their plan is to keep increasing, no doubt, at an alarming rate up to 2030 with the hope of peaking by then. USA, the second biggest contributor, as we know, Donald Trump's due to pull out. The point here is contribution of carbon dioxide to climate change is massive and set to get a lot worse before it gets better. New Zealand's 0.1%. What is Hawke's Bay? 0.01%. We'd have more luck fighting against thunder than thinking we can make a difference here. Climate change is coming. It's real, and we need to get prepared for it. We need to be realistic about what we can achieve and making the best use of funds, directing towards what's going to have the best influence and impact. Remember, the ratepayer is not a bottomless pit. Carbon neutral by 2050. Assessment is we've already increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere to an alarming rate, yet we want to continue slowing our release through to 2050. That's like getting burnt by a hot water tap. And instead of turning it off, just turn it down 0.01% and think it's not going to burn you as much. The answer is to not obviously only turn the tap off, but reverse and turn the cold tap on. Since we love our quotes here around council table, Albert Einstein, you cannot solve our problems with the same thinking used that created them. I believe this fits perfectly here. We need to think about this in a different way. Pine trees isn't it. My vision, and it's only that, as the work's been currently undertaken right now, including proposed in the Hawke's Bay Future Farming Trust, is that we as farmers in New Zealand can have an impact on the carbon levels in our soil, influenced by the way we farm, negative or positively. If we can prove that we can sequester carbon into our soils and show us how to increase that sequestering, imagine the kudos we would get from that and the far bigger impact and actual influence on atmosphere CO2 levels, rather than just reducing a few tonnes here or there. Imagine the investment and the ability to influence change from that position. If we do it the proposed way and be distracted from the need to adapt, we won't be here to be thanked by future generations. Remember, the drought's predicted to be more often, flood expected to be more severe, and sea level rise to flood coastal and lowlands. Our 0.01% isn't going to change that, so let's concentrate on how we deal with it and make our region resilient. Do we know what's coming? Thanks.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. The old voice box a bit gone. We would be the size of a flea on the elephant in terms of the world. If Asia is going to do nothing and carry on the way they are, in South America, it's like Nero. We're fiddling while the forests burn. I hear today orchardists are planting trees. Some of the trees are 40 years old, and I thought trees that lock up carbon. We're talking of transport. It's really the haulage. Those big trucks out there that are hauling. And we need that for export and import. We're talking of animals, ruminant animals, but the cows, the dairy, the milk farms. Beautiful green land when you see it from the air while you're flying to Wellington and back. Beautiful paddocks. Not a tree around them, no windbreaks. There must be a tree to plant there that can grow and lock up the carbon. But we're worried about the paper, we're worried about the rubbish, and we talk about other silly little things. So that's about the only way I can look at it. When it's all finished, we will still be allowed to do our hanging. So, Kate, bye.
Craig?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, can I acknowledge the effort, your passion and what you're trying to achieve in this space. It's absolutely admirable. And when you first mentioned that something like this, you were going to put something like this forward a few weeks ago, I was a little bit surprised, given that what we discussed prior to Christmas, I think in one of our workshops, and that this was going to be embedded in almost everything and anything that we did. And as might have been reflected in the early discussions, I totally share your frustration but also your ambition in making an impact, a change to moving the oil tank is not really quite the right word, but anyway, slightly in a better direction. And so I absolutely endorse you with all of that. The way I see what your proposal is, and maybe if you could just address this when you come to speak, I think it's a solution you're trying to put together to try and affect some action across the region we love so much. I don't think you particularly care too much about what the form is, as long as we get some visible action and the wheel turns. And I share your frustration in this space and many other aspects of what we do as a council, be it climate change, be it water insecurity, be it management of much of our resources. A constant frustration that the leadership across Hawke's Bay, chairs, mayors and councillors are not. We speak that we're on the same page, we say similar things, but when it's tested, not just in climate change actually, we can point to very, very little coordinated regional action for the betterment of our region. Climate change is to the absolute fore of this. I also actually agree totally with you that actually effective and real change starts from the bottom. At the end of the day, central government and organisations such as ourselves can help encourage, assist, regulate, but real change for those scales tip is at the bottom. I actually am involved in a company that does try and mitigate carbon. In fact, I'm a carbon neutral councillor. I might be the only one, I'm not sure. And every month I offset my personal carbon footprint. I do worry that this organisation itself, with its kind of lofty goals and aspirations, I'm just not sure if we're as strong as we might like to think on the integrity of our own awareness of our carbon footprint, of what this organisation does in the close bubble and the impact of the organisation across the region. But I also see incredible opportunities. We are probably very, very carbon positive as a council with the forestry that we own, or the ratepayers we own on behalf of the ratepayers, and I think the other councils are probably the other way. I think there's an outstanding opportunity, as I've mentioned before, for this council to take a lead and to invite them in to essentially make the councils across Hawke's Bay carbon neutral at the very least. I think that's quite possible and probable and does fit with their various rhetoric. I do, once the proposer speaks to his motion, you know, the governance group here is the mayors and the chair of Ngāti Kahungunu, but I have had no information from them, or I can't see anything from them that they're willing to go along with this or want to be part of it. And once again, sadly, I'm optimistic, but pragmatically, my hopes aren't at all high of some effective regional organisation doing something in this space. I just can't see it. To the CEO, James, I'm sure much of what you hear is just a frustration. At the end of the day, we have to follow all these processes, annual plans, long-term plans, and I know once it's in there, it's embedded. I was hugely comforted that you said by July, 1st July next year, this will be in our plan, and perhaps right there lies a potential halfway house for me to have comfort that actually there's something we can at least begin to get organised to see what this is going to shape up like coming out of July, and have so much more teeth into what we are expecting from the 1st of July. I think we should be publicly and honestly testing the value statements and rhetoric of many of the leadership in the region in this space, because if we test it, it's actually found wanting. But again, I worry that, as Councillor Curtin pointed out a minute ago, we probably all didn't really car share coming here. We don't know if many people bike. So I'm not saying we would, and no one was going to bike yesterday, but it's just, there's a pragmatism in there that I do not want the desires of us to lead to be tainted by a failure of us not walking our own talk initially. So there are many, many things in front of us, and things climate, and to me it's almost a failure that we're looking to set something up to specifically look at climate change mitigation. It says to me something's failed within our core proposer organisation or the previous discussions we've had, because we're kind of, it's so important, but this construct treats it as an adjunct as opposed to part of our core. And so my follow through to all of this, however it lands, would be a much more robust reporting who the go-to person within council is of our own of our own actions in the climate change, carbon management mitigation space within council. Because I know who to go to about stock banks, I know who to go to about X, Y, Z. I'm not sure that if we have that line of responsibility or accountability in place beyond yourself. I'm quite keen to hear if in fact we do. Finally, because of what I said right at the start there, Councillor Barker's construct, and he's, well, how it needs some funding, how do we fund it? It's kind of an elegant solution with a disaster relief fund. I'm actually not comfortable with that, but I would ask of the CEO again, so well, hold on, there is monies somewhere, it's just the lines they're associated with, and we've got other discussions later today, which we are spending funds in this climate space, tree space. So I think that, again, I need to see more information in depth if we're to pursue this. So regardless which way I go, absolutely reiterate my desire, my need to see this council lead itself, and then be a magnet to the other councils and offer to them assistance to help them manage their climate change aspirations and deliver upon them. I think, again, Councillor Foley made a very, very good point there, what he believes the expectations of people in Central Hawke's Bay would be by and large. By and large across the bay, I think they'd be reflected in different ways. If we went out there, most people want us and expect us to be doing something, but they also know central government's got the biggest levers there, but they also look to us to take action to help them in their space. And we need to look every one of them in the eye and say what we're doing matches what we've said we'll do, and the import of a climate.smart.annual plan, which goes through to a long-term plan. This is what it means. It does not mean 2 hybrid cars out of a fleet of 60 or however many we've got. It means we take the extra step ourselves to measure our footprint, to measure the impact of all things regional council on the carbon footprint of Hawke's Bay, and doing everything we can to manage and mitigate that.
Thank you, Craig. Martin?
Yeah, thank you. And I was thinking quite carefully about what I might say about this motion as I walk to work, my wife having taken our electric car to work. I will be more serious and less facetious or flippant in what I say next. I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Foley's very considered and thoughtful perspectives on this issue, and those of the other councillors and my colleagues to this point. You know, I've heard it said that we need to go to war on climate change, not with guns, tanks or bombs, but with the same single-minded, determined and complete resolve as if we were at war. Every man, every woman, every child on the case. To some extent, what James shared with us today reveals that this organisation is already there. And yet there is this perceived, I think, at governance level, gap or frustration at the ability to overcome the inertia, the local inertia, the national inertia, and certainly, as Will shared with us, the international inertia that just doesn't seem to be able to turn this ship round in terms of our global emissions profile. This is not a business as usual scenario. This is not a we are doing okay situation. This is not it's working. We need to do something utterly radical. And so I support the motion to the point that we cost it, that we put it back at the forefront of the Leaders' Forum agenda, and that we fully understand by the time we get to the long-term plan what support there is within Ngāti Kahungunu, the other local authorities, and what the implications would be for our ratepayers. Because, you know, this council, if behaviour change is at the heart of it, we do that every day. We do that with our farming community every day. We are out there encouraging best practice, advising on best practice. That's why we've set up the Future Farming Trust, or we've supported it. So I don't see this as being something new as a skill set. It is, after all, social ecology that I believe, Mr. Chairman, you are driving at a form of. But at the end of the day, and I've got two more points to make, we need to own this as governors. If we want to drive this as governors, and this has got a rates implication, I think what James is telling us, we're the ones who are going to need to be able to stand up and have the courage to deal with that. And the perception survey is going to have an element of willingness to pay information coming at us. But maybe there is an opportunity here to go to central government and say to central government, we're willing to pilot as a region delivery of your emissions reduction plan under the Zero Carbon Act through everything we do as a region, from social ecology to regional planning to farm environment management plans. But we need some financial support. We could be the pilot. We could show the leadership we have with coastal erosion on the mitigation front. My final point is this. I will never accept, till the day I die, the fart against thunder argument. New Zealand farted against thunder in 1985. It was called nuclear ships. A little nation of 4 million people then turned the world on its head in the nuclear debate. We have no choice but to show leadership here. We cannot wait for the rest of the world to destroy itself. We need to show how it can be done. And I think this notice of motion has merit to be explored in the manner I've just outlined for future debate and discussion around this table accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bill.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair, and it's from my perspective, it's great to have followed on from my colleagues, because you've got an opportunity to digest the various strands and arguments, and they have very substantial merit. Two I want to pick up in particular. This opportunity, and I just call it that, is around adding to our repertoire, adding to our armoury, this individual consumer decision, this change by sector in the community. So a groundswell from the bottom up of changes in behaviour, and yes, that can happen. I'm convinced of that. Going to your bike analogy, having just spent a bit of time in Amsterdam, it's blindingly obvious that we can change the way we move ourselves around. I pick up particularly, I think the lesson we've got in front of us is the last few months of the COVID experience. What we had and have seen is this pall of smoke and debris across the world being lifted, and that took place because individually people stayed at home. That's what we did. We stayed at home, and as a consequence, the world became a better place for this very short window Part of that was, you think about it, we stopped industrial production, but significantly we stopped flying. We stopped those 200,000 aircraft in the air at any one time. And miraculously, the impacts were there to see. And Councillor Lambert highlighted that the satellite images showed this dramatic change in the shape of the world. The climate opportunity was there. I'm heartened to hear the resolve around the table, and Councillor Foley correctly pointed out that hang on a minute, it is in the context, we've got to spend money on this, and where are we going to get that money? And that's a very valid point, and we need to address that. We need to craft this thing some more. But the thing that really stuck in my mind is the notion of complete resolve that Councillor Williams talked about. And I'll say this because we need to reset across all of our strategies and all our investments. We're about, and I would suggest that this will be the real crunch point of walk the walk. We're about to, or we will look to invest $1.5 million in promoting the emission of carbon by people travellers coming to the bay. So here we have the look and feel of expenditure to mitigate climate change. Over here is a major investment, one of our largest, in promoting people to come to the region. So how do we reconcile these two strategies that we've got in play? We're either serious about this or we're not. We're either totally resolved to dealing with this war, taking this thing to war, or not. So that's a conundrum that I'm sure will vex us as we go into the long-term plan. Finally, Mr. Chair, I'm delighted to see your remit in front of us. It's timely, and all it needs, in my view, is significant crafting. In the first instance, let's get some traction, and I suggest a pilot in drawing on the emergency fund in year one would be a good place to start, but then really get serious within the long-term plan. So that possibly is a solution to overcome the resourcing of it. Finally, Mr. Chair, I totally concur with your contention that we can make individual consumer decisions at the ground level. We can make changes in behaviour across our various industrial sectors, and this is an opportunity to do it.
Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora tata. Thank you. This has been a very interesting debate and discussion on a really important, not important, probably crucial topic. And to an extent, I've been playing catch up as to where the regional council's at with some of this stuff, as it's been a number of years since I've sat around a council central table. On first appearance or first reading of this, it seemed like a no-brainer and a fairly simple sort of move forward. But listening to the debate, then there are many other factors that come in. So for me, the attractiveness of this was that the focus would be on climate change. As I observe local authorities and the way they work, they are bureaucracies that are guided by various acts. They attract certain streams of funding. They go ahead and do these things, and everything gets caught up in the detail of that particular program. And not very often do people step back and look at the whole thing as where it's going. So if you ask someone on the street what was regional council doing towards climate change, they probably wouldn't be able to answer you. And yet we know very well from your work programs and everything you do that probably 90% of your energy and programming and management is going in on these initiatives and interventions. But that doesn't show outside very well. And so by having a specific group that looks at climate change or labelled that, then that has the opportunity to bring a focus and maybe focus the whole of council's direction rather than these divided type of activities. And even though they may be run efficiently and they may work well or work to varying degrees of success, I don't know whether you maximise the effort if it doesn't come in one focus. Having said that, I think that, and it's been brought up in this debate, that the title and the whole idea of mitigation vis-a-vis adaptation, that's a strategic direction. It's a philosophical argument about strategic direction that the council needs to address is where they're at with that. Because again, the general public will get confused if the council doesn't have a clear view of where they're going with this whole thing called climate change. The success of this group is going to be, as Councillor Curtin just pointed out, in the how it's crafted and how it's put together. The powers in terms of reference, the financing, and that. So if it's not going to be just another level of bureaucracy, if it's going to be an action type group, then that's going to be the real challenge for the council. One, to give it direction, clear direction, and then two, to give it the tools to be effective. Given that you have financial restraints, budgetary, and of course I'm very conscious of the, as Councillor Foley pointed out, the effect on ratepayers. It behoves the council to actually look very wise use of that money. So it comes to two things then, or comes back to the having a focus on climate change, or having a body or a management grouping, is whether it's going to improve the effectiveness of how the council deals with this thing called climate change. If it doesn't add to the effectiveness, then it's a waste of time. And so the question should be that, how does it become effective? How's it going to be really? We've had the talk, dui hui, all that sort of thing, and that's a fair criticism to be put at any local authority that can spend a lot of time in council meetings on this, and then the action end doesn't meet up to the public promise to the public. So, Mr. Chairman, what I'm suggesting is then, should this remit go forward, then a lot of work has to be put into how is it the most effective way. You've already talked about staffing and funding, but maybe it should be left more flexible until it can be considered more, because maybe the idea should be to pass it in principle that there is a need for a focus group on climate change, and have a lot more discussion on what that is. So I'm generally in favour of this. I just think there are reservations with how and where it should go, and the point is effectiveness, not from a council point of view, but from a public perception point of view. Good.
Good, thank you. Well, thank you for that. This has been a really interesting discussion. Yeah, it's one that I think that we've all committed to, and we're all serious about. Make no mistake about that. Can I say to you that this is something which has troubled me deeply for a long time, and it troubles me even more as time goes on. I sent you a note the other day for something different I've spoken about, but from the Huffington Post, where in the Arctic, the permafrost has melted. When I was a kid, it was always frozen solid. It's melted, gone. And out of this bog is coming methane gases, and because of that, it's self-igniting. The Huffington Post report said this is a warning cry. That's what it said. Unthinkable that the Arctic is on fire from when I grew up as a kid. I was petrified when I saw that the Antarctica is warming at 3 times the global rate. Now, ice that sits on the water of glaciers is not going to raise water, sea level, but ice that sits on land like Antarctica, a huge mass of Greenland, is going to raise it and raise it rapidly. Every time I've seen a prediction about sea level rise, every prediction so far has been grossly underdone. At the big flood that came in, waves smashed in the south of Wellington, damaging houses, threatening things, one observer said this will be common in New Zealand in 20 years' time, with sea level rise at the rate it is. This is the lifetime of a mortgage. This is nothing. There's not even an eye blink in geological time. Like Martin, I think this is something we just have to be totally fixed on and at war on. Total commitment to. We owe it to future generations. I have to say that my generation, the generations before it, we burned a lot of coal, fuel, whatever. We knew not what we did, but we're now learning. It's time to stop. I watch what's happening at the international level with dismay. I watch what's happening at the national level with some concerns. But as a regional councillor, I can't involve myself in those. I have no influence on them. What we do have is influence on what we do here. And in this, I'm absolutely also in Martin's camp. I don't accept the argument that thunder outweighs farting at all. I don't accept that, because every change has been made for the better in our society has been led by 1 or 2 people, or small people, or groups of people. They've led it. They've fought and struggled because they were right. It seems to me on this issue that mitigating against climate change is right. Simply to adapt is to accept the consequences and will retreat further and further and further from the coast. Well, what is that? Is that an answer? No, it's not. Are we going to start to worry about mitigation when the sea gets past Paki? Well, far too late then. We owe it to do something now. And yes, we have limited levers, I accept that, but that doesn't mean to say we should do nothing. I feel, when I look around, I just get desperate about it, because I feel that we are writing the rights, doing the words, and when I look at how we interact with each other, I thought, can we get a fund out of all the councils to go and do this? And I looked at that and I had to honestly say to myself, it's going to take a long while for all the councils to sign up to something like this. They're all under funded pressure. So put that aside. If it's going to be done, we have to do this alone. The second element of it was, if we're going to fund this, where are we going to fund it from? We've got a 0 rate. We can't do it at that. And so it came to the emergency fund, which we dipped into very quickly recently because we had a declaration and it was an emergency. Well, there is an emergency here, and we have a declaration, so both conditions are filled. So if we're going to mitigate against climate change, my personal view is we have to give it resources. In resources, I mean people. Without people doing things, nothing happens. Words on paper don't do anything. So we need people to go and do things. And are we going to go and tell people to do things? I don't think you can tell people. I come to it before you ask. Yes, I don't have a prescription for it. It's not science-based, James. All of those are failings. I concede to every one of them is hopeless from that perspective. But I look through the telescope from the other end. And I stayed with a little analogy. I went to Ed Hillary's funeral, where one of the families recounted the story about how Ed Hillary was sitting at home one night, and the phone rings. His partner comes to him and says, Ed, it's a phone call from David Longy, the Prime Minister. He'd like to talk to you. He says, well, what would he want to talk to me about? He said, well, answer the phone. So he goes and picks up the phone. Ed Hillary here. Ed, Longy boomed. I want you to be New Zealand's first High Commissioner to India. Whatever would I do there? Said Ed. You do what you think best, said Longy. And he did. And I thought, the perfect job description. Don't worry about the description. get the best person for the job. They will know what to do. So if you recruit the best people who are well motivated, you don't need to give them a job description. So what is it we want them to do? We want them to lead our community into making changes about how they operate, behaviour change. I'd like them to say, stop on the street and say, yeah, Jeff, why are you driving a car? Why aren't you bike? Don't you think you should use a bike? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I could. We can make change because we ask people. We need people to go and pose the questions, do the things. We need someone to go to Watties and say, are you aware of all the things the government does to help you here? Oh, probably, yeah, we are, but have you done anything about them? Well, do you think we should? We do. With nothing other than the moral authority of the regional council and the councils to say, we want to do this. We want to do this because we want to lead our community. We want to lead our people, and we want to be the best we can be. We have no authority to speak about these matters unless we do the best we can. Be the best we can. That's what we have to have, the moral authority to do that. And I think we need to have people on the ground to go into it and make a clear statement that not only are we going to do all the mitigation, the adaptation we can and do it extremely well, but we're going to do our best to lead our community for mitigation. Now, I accept my proposal has a few rough edges on it, but not all is unsalvageable. And so I will propose a motion and to have the resolution not to vote on the resolution, but to refer it directly to the regional council for consideration, and that it be accompanied with a report on how the options for financing this thoroughly. To pick up Craig's point, these options be canvassed with the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee and the Chief Executive, so that we have some report from the mayors of the other TAs as their mayoral views on this, and that we have a more considered report on what the processes might be. So we don't give the idea away, but we might have to re-amend it and readapt it. Because I sense around this table there is a strong will to do stuff, put it that way. Absolute commitment to do it. I don't sense that anybody is against it, and so we just need to refine our processes. So I would move a procedural motion, if I'm entitled to, I think I can, that this be referred directly to the next regional council meeting for further consideration, and to be accompanied by a report on the funding of this proposal, advice from the mayors as to what their views are, and secondly that further thought from the staff about the processes. Now, would someone like to move that?
Well, you've moved that?
Oh, well, I think it would be someone else move.
I'll move that.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay.
I would like to ask a question of the staff about it.
Yeah, sure.
If that is the motion that's now on the table, what would be a realistic time frame? In other words, which council meeting, which month, do you think would be appropriate to give us the most sensible likelihood of a decent answer to those questions?
If I could answer that for you myself, I was intending it to be the council meeting at the end of this month. If the reports are incomplete, well then we can defer it for a further month.
I'd like to hear the staff views on that.
So the council meeting on the 29th of July would need the papers finalised the week before, Thursday the 23rd, so we'd have just over 2 weeks to complete that analysis and that engagement, so that's tight. The preference would be for another month, to be honest with you, Chair, but I recognise that equally much has been said about being on a wartime footing. And if
It's only one councillor who mentioned that.
I agree with him.
If there was an imminent invasion that needed to be responded to, I'm sure this organisation would pull out all stops within 2 weeks and deliver said advice. So I'm just not sure that I can sustain the argument fully that another month is justifiable. So we'll do best endeavours to bring back some advice, and it may be that there's further work to do at that stage.
Just a thing with that, if the chair of the Finance, Audit Risk says we can't get the budget done in time, I'll be happy with that. If the chair of the regional council says it's not complete in time, I'll accept their advice, defer it another month. but expected by the end of the month. If it can't be done, following month.
So can I just ask for clarity, Chair? Thanks for that. So really what you're doing is suggesting that we, the motion that's been presented to us, we're going to just put that over there for a moment, park that for a moment, and use it as a catalyst for further discussion to pull up the concerns or the positives and negatives around the table, to try and bash it into shape, and with the advice from the CEO, you'll still be sponsoring it and it will go through the channels. What we have in front of us, the ambition will be unchanged probably, but the form may differ or the funding may differ, because I think you're quite rightly picked up around the table. I don't think there's disagreement on the ambition. It's just how we kind of get there, or our awareness of what's already happening or what could happen if we in fact kicked a few shins ourselves, or picked up our own game.
Yep.
Is that kind of really where you're at?
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
I think I'm insisting we're in the process of here, if I may use it, adaptation if necessary.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, the procedural motion will be deferred to the next council meeting. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Carried. Okay, can we have morning tea now? I think we've got...
Yeah, I can arrange that.
Thank you, council. That was a very good debate.
So I will
Very
buy
good.
Saturday's paper, what I will.
We're break. We're due back here at 5 to 11.
By the way, Dan's, I think this is 100 years.